All right, cyber traders, welcome on back to another fantastic edition of our live workshop. Although today's not really too fantastic, is it? The markets ended up getting crushed overnight once again. Obviously, not a good day to be an investor, but perhaps it could be depending on how this afternoon shapes up, though. But great to have all of us back here, though. Otherwise, for Traders Talk, we are good to go, though, here inside our live trading room, the trading floor, rather. Gillis, Kerry, Margaret, got all of us, though, here. Otherwise, give me a quick sound check, make sure everyone can hear me loud and clear there. We should be good to go. Had a small little tech hiccup earlier today, so just double checking here. Cross my T's, dot my I's from Kerry, Michael, Kevin, Laureen. Great to always see here. All right, perfect, folks. Got a fat tongue here today. We'll probably have a little bit of a lisp, whatever you want to call it. But nevertheless, great to have all of us back on social media, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, the works, at Cyber Trading U, popping up on the bottom in blue. If you're not followed or subscribed yet to any of our social media handles, at Cyber Trading U is our YouTube handle. Go right to YouTube, follow, subscribe, and hit the notification icon as well so you know when we're going live. We do this workshop every Monday afternoon here at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So let's cut right to the point here. Great to have Rick here joining us, Larry, Jeff, all of us though here otherwise as well in the trading floor. But what's going to happen to this market, right? That's what I'm sure everyone here is, looking to figure out the answer to. What's going to happen to the market? Well, much like you should know here inside our live trading room, we take this level by level. We take this day by day. Give me a brief moment here because I'm going to go back to Friday's chat. It's all about plotting your levels out in advance. I mean, we knew the markets were likely to pull back to some degree going into today. We didn't know that it would be this much of a drop off, and then let alone to have the slingshot to be caught earlier this morning. Honestly, this is probably like top 3 craziest market days that I've been a part of, and I've been here for like 11 years. So that's where I'll tell you, at least this was crazy, but it still comes down to planning and preparation and knowing where your key levels are. So that will take me to the SPY chart because we've been talking about this now for like a month at this point. Once we ended up breaking around 565 area here, this took maybe like a few weeks, just some chop at first, but it flipped support essentially into resistance from last week's pop. But otherwise, the more we keep dropping, where's our next real floor? Where's our next support level here? We don't really have a strong one because given how much the market had ran back from the end of 23 into 24, there wasn't much time where this was consolidating. There wasn't much time where this was building support. There are some pullback points. So that's where I'll at least say, hey, we were talking about 535, 540 area here, right? Well, by the time it came down to that, that was from Friday afternoon. It closed under it. Thursday afternoon, it had closed under it. And then obviously gapped down much lower, even in the after hours into the morning for Friday. So that got easily broken through. Let me ask our students here really briefly. Rick, Kerry, Larry, Laureen, Michael. When a stock breaks through big support and it tanks, what should support initially look to flip into? What are we expecting that support to initially flip into? Resistance. So this should be treated as resistance, at least when it reapproaches that price. Probably won't be for a little while, but nevertheless, it kept dropping into Friday. Then obviously today, well, where's our next damn support level here, right? Well, you're thinking maybe right around 518-ish, maybe around 520. It did wick down here back at the end of May, post Memorial Day here. And then it broke under that, but more so look at the 2 days afterwards, though. There were a couple of days where it was kind of holding around 518-ish. That could be your next support level over time. Now, again, though, keep in mind, we had made you aware of that inside our live trading room because this is the chat just from Friday, the end of last week. And I was saying at 8:30 in the morning, SPY already at the next historical level, breaking under 540. You may see a bounce into the close today with some sort of short covering, but not going to be a hero and try to catch this yet, though. And I was responding back to one of our members, Carlos, there at the time, saying next support on the SPY after 518-ish area is not until 495 to 500. Now, obviously, we broke even below that early this morning in pre-market. In the overnight hours today, we actually fell as low as 480. We're talking at like 3 in the morning, 2:30, 3 o'clock Eastern in the morning here. We actually did drop as low as like 480. So I guess we kind of wicked down there early in pre-market. We held the higher low here. Then we started to bounce. But it just goes to show, though, that And I mean, we're already at 495, and I guess we're trying to hold over that right now as we're talking, right? As of right now, we're still making higher lows on the intraday graph, but this is where it gets very tricky. Um, it's holding our historical level. It's not too often where the markets drop off 20% over a matter of days or a week or whatever it is, however long off the highs. We don't really see 20% pullbacks too frequent. So this does set up for a good opportunity to look for a bounce. But the question though is this going to keep holding as support today? Or is it going to be into tomorrow where it tries to wick below it and then it makes the slingshot tomorrow? It's so impossible to judge the bounce and the timing of support holding. So today will be interesting to just see if it can close over it. We were looking for this to hold as support earlier today as it pulled back there. And thankfully, as a day trade, it did hold as support. It bounced back up briefly here. And that led to a bunch of stocks bouncing. That led to Nvidia bouncing back up pretty nicely. That led to Tesla making a small little move. Apple was one of the better pops, at least in the morning. So that ended up making a nice little bounce again off 180. Point being is that this provides so many different opportunities for day trading. So if you're a swing trader here, if you're holding on, if you're looking for a long-term position, I still say wait it out, because although we're already at our next, major historical support level, we need to see confirmation of support holding over time. So wait to see it close over this level. Wait till today. Wait till tomorrow. Um, I'm sure like what by next week or the week after, don't we already have another CPI report to worry about? Then another Fed meeting maybe after that. It's like, holy shit, like, there is never a pause button. The foot is never taken off the gas pedal when it comes to volatility in the stock market. So this will provide us some time to look for a bounce. Don't try and be the hero just yet and front load a position. And then next thing you know, later today at 3 o'clock, well, you see it break down more. You might see a breakthrough this support later in the day and drop back down to 490 or even 480. Who knows? All right. So basically, I wanted to start off by going over this move, at least from earlier today, just all a matter of knowing where your key levels are. Pretty interesting what essentially became as resistance here on this intraday graph. I mean, it broke over it, but it's all a matter of seeing the reaction from that point afterwards. So it's that 517, 518, 520 ish. Well, that past historical level, that became resistance here today, didn't it? So, let's see what happens this afternoon. But hey, at this support, the more it keeps getting poked at, poked at, poked at, probably we'll see it break down more. Probably we'll see it break lower heading into the afternoon. So, folks, just stay tuned. There's a lot more to talk about here. Laureen saying that the CPI report is this Thursday, even. What the hell? It's crazy how fast time flies. Like, I felt like last month's CPI was like maybe last week, a week ago. So it goes to show actually the CPI is even this Thursday. And then you got the PPI report, another like data metric number that they give out on this Friday. Crazy. All right. So this will at least take me to Bitcoin, right? Because otherwise, I know a lot of us have had our focus on Bitcoin. I've had my eyes on this since I sold at 89 to 90,000. I've been trading this in and out, short, long, short, long. Today, early in the morning, I ended up getting a long. I had missed out at first from like the real lows at 3 in the morning when the market bottomed out at like 480, the SPY. Well, Bitcoin actually here bottomed out as low as like 74,000 here. I just wasn't there to take the trade. I was like actually up at the time, believe it or not, but I was A, half awake, and then B, otherwise, it's tough to, feel very confident with trying to look for the bounce. So I'd missed out on the initial like bounce off the low here, but heading into the market open, at least I caught a nice little day trade at first. And then at least afterwards, we caught another slingshot here as the markets ended up making that first bounce. So with Bitcoin, the one thing I want to bring up today for traders talk is this. Who here, whether you're inside our live trading room or if you're on YouTube, anyone here familiar with what's called the M2 global money supply? Anyone here familiar with that phrase, that metric, the M2 global money supply? It says fleetingly. Sam says no. John says yes. Margaret says yes. Gillis says no. Dave says no. Or Dave says yes. Kevin says no. There we go. Mixed bag, right? All right. So in my layman's terms of, giving you an explanation here, The global money supply tracks basically global currency, global free cash, bonds, convertible bonds, notes, etc. That is a lot more liquid, even just than stocks. So I want to point out that we're going to do a little comparison here of this M2 global money supply chart. They report this metric actually every Monday, and then otherwise there's another number I believe that comes out every month. The price action that you see here in blue is basically the M2 global money supply. So I just want to point out something here. Notice that since 2017 at the least, if not maybe even longer, just pretty much just straight up, right? A couple of points where it pulled back, where the M2 global money supply dropped off in number, but it bounced back up, it pushed back up more, right? All right. Well, what's easy to say here is that that's not a direct correlation to Bitcoin here. Bitcoin had some bigger drops, bigger shakes here. Here's the COVID pullback. These two are totally two different things. I just want to point this out first and foremost. As I go forward on this, I just want to point out these are two totally separate things. However, since 2024, the beginning of 2024, there has been some extreme correlation between Bitcoin price action and the M2 global money supply. Now, one thing also to point out here is that this is like an indicator on TradingView. Just have it up as like, a little overlay. The thing with this little money supply is that there is a setting that you need to offset this chart from the real-time like data. They either give a number of either 76 days offset or 108 days offset. I can't give you any real rhyme or reason as to why those numbers, why not more, why not less, whatever it is. I don't have that answer for you here. From my simpleton brain that's very good with pattern recognition and chart analysis, I'm going to stick with this number here, the 108-day setting. Now, here's what I want to show you. Look what happened since 2024, the beginning. When Bitcoin dipped off here, the M2 global money supply kind of bottomed out, dipped down a little bit more. But then you could see some pretty interesting price action here where basically as the M2 global money supply moved up, so did Bitcoin. When the M2 global money supply failed to break higher here, Bitcoin failed to break higher here. Looks pretty interesting. Now, over time, we ended up getting higher lows. We eventually got higher lows here, and we eventually moved up even more over time. And, pretty much similar where the M2 global money supply did top off. This is essentially where Bitcoin hit roughly around 110,000 and began this pullback. Now, since that time, look what's happened. We ended up dropping down, moved up a little bit, pulled back again. This is exactly what this blue line is representing here. This is extremely tight correlation with this M2 global money supply metric. This is an indicator that's plotted on a chart, so it kind of paints this here for you, comparing the M2 global money supply with Bitcoin price action. Why is this the case? Like, why are they so much more tightly knit now in 2024, 2025 compared to previous years? I mean, hey, just for reference, look what happened when the M2 global money supply kept going up, 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 up. Well, Bitcoin eventually topped off. Bitcoin eventually pulled back, right? So there was a weaker correlation between the two up until the beginning of last year. And there are points of decoupling. Like, look at COVID year here. Obviously, Bitcoin ended up crashing during the pandemic. The global money supply didn't. It eventually moved up over time, right? Now, why is this the case? This could just be more of the institutionalization of Bitcoin, where it's not just the United States, my friends. It is Russia, it's the UAE, it's China, it's Japan, it's North and South Korea. I don't know if you've heard, but North Korea has a shit ton of Bitcoin that they have actually hacked. So, yeah, South Korea, but also North Korea too. A bunch of sovereign nations, looking to transition into Bitcoin and make that the dominant currency. So I think that now, since all of these countries and institutions, meaning like hedge funds and management, both firms, are buying it by the bunch, I think that you're starting to see a tighter knit correlation between the two. Now, let's go a step further. Notice that last year with this metric, the M2 global money supply, last year, well, we actually had higher lows. You actually had higher lows here, right? And even when it broke the trend line, it kind of still built a higher low still, and from this dip point. Well, what gives? Because Bitcoin eventually ended up crashing. We ended up seeing a bit of a decoupling here where we didn't get higher lows, we got lower lows here, right? Look what happened as the M2 money supply was making higher lows. Bitcoin itself was making lower lows there, right? I picked up on that. I noticed this over the weekend when I was doing my research. I was studying this. I noticed this evidently. I'm like, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Why? Because check this out. We ended up seeing Bitcoin drop a lot today, and it broke a new low from March 11th, 76,500. That was the low back from March 11th. I got a fat tongue here today. I'm chewing on it. Basically, we broke lower this morning, right? Almost a repeat of what happened back, last year with this, where we saw that, kind of decoupling. So the lower lows on Bitcoin, where this was making the higher lows, right? Well, this will be interesting because we have this nice trend line here. You could say first off of these lows here, one, two, and then it crashed into it again here today. Or you could even just try and make it this one off the green bar, the low here. Either way, it kind of fell into this trend with lower lows. And yeah, you're not going to catch it perfectly, but this essentially made a very similar type of bounce back up that we had here back from August 5th, right? Notice that we had a pretty good slingshot here, eventually built out a higher low one more time, then moved up. And again, keep in mind that's where this M2 global money supply was actually making higher lows. So it is pretty interesting how that pattern repeated itself here over the last few days, over the last week or so. Give me a second. Now, there we go. Now, here's actually one more caveat to make this pretty coincidental. Obviously, if you could answer this for me, folks, I'm going to answer your question in a second, Sam. What weekday is today? Today is obviously April 7th. What weekday is today, my friends? Today is a Monday, right? Today is a Monday. Let's take a look back on the Bitcoin daily chart here at the last few times that we've seen some larger wicks down, some larger down wicks. This was basically coming off a weekend, albeit Tuesday. This was going into a weekend on a Friday. This was on a Monday, the 3rd. This was also on a Monday, January 13th. It's pretty interesting. Monday, huh? Mondays are starting to kind of click there. Can you take a stab in the dark as to what weekday this was on August 5th, where we saw this kind of break lower, as we were saying? Monday. Now, let's go even one more step further because we're going to break this up into an hourly chart. This is August 5th, Monday. How did the markets react on that day exactly? Like, was it the morning? Was it the afternoon? When did we catch that bounce? Yeah, seems like that's pretty consistent, Kerry, right? Like coming off Mondays or coming into Mondays, we typically have more volatility off the weekend, right? Now here we are. This is Monday, August 5th. We wicked down at 2 in the morning. 2 in the morning, we wicked down there. And then by the time the market opened up from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, basically, this candle bounced back up. And since that point, we were going back up afterwards, right? This was on August 5th, that manic Monday. What happened here today, my friends? Dropped down at what time? What time is that? I mean, hey, it's funny how history could repeat itself here. 2 o'clock in the morning. What time did the markets pop here? 9 o'clock into 10 o'clock. I mean, hey, I don't make this up. I ain't no magician here. I'm just a good researcher. I'll just leave it at that. So, hopefully we do see more of a bounce over time. But here's where I'll tell you, though, with this M2 global money supply. Who was here on Friday? Was anyone here right now live that was with us back on Friday, the end of last week? Because you may have heard me say, like, hey, guys, in the next 30 to 35 days, I am strongly confident that we are going to get a bounce. Remember me saying that? Something like that, right? Something similar. Don't quote me verbatim, but something similar. 30 to 35 days, right? Yeah, it's based off this M2 global money supply. So, basically we're bottoming out back going into the end of April. We're starting to move back up going into early May, and this is about a month out. This is about 30 days out. And then it looks like the global money supply is really pushing back up and to the point where it actually breaks new highs over time. So, does that mean that Bitcoin itself is going to break new highs over time and perhaps as soon as mid to late June into mid July? Is that possible? Yeah, I think that's pretty possible. Um, I don't have any position running right now. I was trading this from earlier today. Got out of a trade just before, and I ended up wiping out a good win. I could have made some good money on before, but that was after the markets came back down a bit. But in volatile times, you got to play good defense here. You don't want to try and hope and hold, be a hero. I'm teaching a live workshop right now, and what happens if I'm not keeping track of my positions? So yeah, we are starting to bounce back up a small bit, but guys, we got time today. We got time tomorrow. We got time this week. I think there's going to be a lot more time before we get that real bounce back up. Give it about 5 more weeks, 4 to 5 more weeks. I think that we'll start to see really good movement over time. Does that mean that we can't break lower again? No. So, hey, we're at 78K right now. Look what happens the coming days here. More of a pullback. So let's see what happens going into that CPI report that Laureen brought up to us. That's on Thursday, right? Looks like we're getting some sort of movement up on the global supply here going into Thursday, Friday. So, perhaps it's possible that we see more of a pullback before that point, and then we get a better bounce afterwards. I'm just pointing this out to you because what I tend to focus on is high probability. What happens more often than not? And since the beginning of 2024 into right now, we're about what, 17, 18 months in almost. That's where I'll tell you, at least here, there's really good correlation between the M2 global supply and Bitcoin price action. This isn't just US currency. This isn't just Russian currency. This isn't just China currency. This is global currency. I'm talking about Bitcoin. So that's where I think that there's a lot more of a coupling here over time. But again, it's not going to be perfect. There are patterns where you did see Bitcoin break lower as this ended up building up. That's what allowed me to have the confidence to expect more here today, to see this pull back a little bit down towards 75, 74. Even at that point, I was still a little chicken to jump in right at this stage, but I think that there's still going to be time long term. All right, we've got a bunch of questions here. Bunch of questions right now. There we go. Let me just go from top to bottom here. Sam up top there to begin. Is the M2 money supply a day-to-day, up-to-date number, or is it forward and backwards looking? You could only put this on the daily chart. Only put this on the daily chart here. This indicator, it's on TradingView. Global M2 money supply, days offset. Like this exact name. If you don't write days offset in the search, you won't get it. So, basically it's just on TradingView here, but it's a statistic. You can look this up online. It's on, I think it's like the Fred St. Louis, Fed website or something like that. The actual number is. So I'll just mention that at least. You could pretty much use this on the daily chart. Don't mess around with this on other charts. It's going to get broken. This is only applicable here on the daily chart. All right. Are there times of year that Bitcoin does better, summer, Xmas, etc.? Not really. Not really. I mean, not in terms of seasonality. In terms of cycles, everyone talks about the Bitcoin halving. The Bitcoin halving here, meaning that every 4 years, the available amount of Bitcoin to mine out there, there's like a shock supply where it drops off by 50%. You can't really live and die by that, though, because over the last Bitcoin halving, which was back on April 20th of last year, well, we only broke higher like 6 months after that fact. So that whole Bitcoin halving event, which is every 4 years, that will still be the case. Like there's going to be a Bitcoin halving in 2028. But point being is that you can't really live and die by that anymore. Back in the day, you used to just kind of buy Bitcoin right after that Bitcoin halving event kicked off and just print money. It's not like that anymore now. So long story short, Michael, there aren't really great seasons or like times of the year in that regard, but it's more based off of just chart patterns and I mean, really patterns and levels alike. How do you get M2 money supply out in the future? So no, you need to do the offset, and basically at 108 days offset, it will kind of give you a small projection for what's ahead. So it already does give you a bit of a projection out in the future there, Sam. No problem there, Scott. So Scott's saying, Josh, how do you see states, foreign countries, and financial entities buying into Bitcoin and other crypto as portfolio reserves and ETFs right now? Upward price pressure eventually because of limited number of coins. Long story short, yes. But again, if that was the case, then April 20th of last year, we would have seen an instant move up or like, a pretty quick move up shortly after the halving of last year. But basically, though, to tell you, you can't time it. 4 years ago, I tried to time it. If Michael Leda, Grant, great to have Grant back, by the way. I want to give him a quick shout out here. But a lot of our longtime students that were with us 4 or 5 years ago, you may have heard me say like, oh, well, can't wait for Apple to buy Bitcoin. Can't wait for Twitter to jump into the Bitcoin game. And Jack Dorsey at the time, this was before Elon owned Twitter, by the way. So basically to tell you that none of those companies outside of Dorsey ended up buying Bitcoin specifically for their companies. They didn't add it to their treasury. I mean, hey, I don't know the compliance and the BS involved with, adding Bitcoin to your company's balance sheet or your treasury, whatever it is. I know recently from the end of last year, there were some legalization things that made it easier for companies to do this now. Now, I'm talking about companies. Now, let's talk about states and sovereign nations and countries alike, right? You can't time it. You can't time it. You can't guess, oh, so and so country is going to do this then, or you have to play by the chart. Over time, maybe this year, maybe next year, we'll see some nations basically make a commitment to Bitcoin, not just buy, but make it their national currency essentially. Basically, but basically not. I know that a lot of people are looking at UAE to make that move and eventually just start buying a shit ton of Bitcoin for their nation to kind of move away from oil a bit and go into Bitcoin. There's smaller sovereign nations that need to do this because their currency is getting just completely decimated, right? What about, I think it was Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken. Either Turkish lira, that's what it was. Turkish lira is getting cooked from the last few years. So a lot of these countries, at least from my limited, bird brain here, it's to say that they need to make this change over time to try and catch up. It's like basically, a gold rush where the slower you are to collect some gold, then you're going to be left, no pun intended, in the dust, as spot prices just soar and increase. Now, again, if it was that easy, then we would have taken off from the end of last year and we would have topped off already at 250,000 at this point. Not that easy. I think that now Bitcoin is so much more tied and correlated, not just with M2 money global supply, but let's just now factor in US equities, right? So again, they're different. But if we do happen to see the US stock market crash for one specific reason of its own, it will affect Bitcoin. It's not like, it's going to easily swim upstream on days where the markets are tanking. Quite frankly, I was pretty surprised this past Friday when Bitcoin, kind of did that. It was dropping still, but it was holding up a little bit better. But you're not going to expect that to be every single day of the week. I mean, obviously, look what happened over this weekend into today. So I just want to point out, Scott, my answer is, I see that, of course, like you pointed out, upward price pressure eventually because of the limited number of coins. Yes, but don't time it. Play it by levels. And that's where, at least going into the next few weeks, if the M2 money supply does taper off and go back up, well, I feel like at the worst, bare worst, again, no pun intended, bare worst, bare, we could probably see resistance get flipped into support, right? Perhaps over time we'll end up seeing this drag down towards past resistance that we had back from last year, back from the halving. So if we could eventually see this hold, and then going into early to mid-May, get like a stronger bounce back up, maybe break this trend line here, fly back upward there. Seems like that's essentially going to happen because I'm trying to draw a trend line right now off the global money supply. Watch. See how this kind of breaks this trend line here, flips it into support afterwards, a bump and run, then it flies. So it wouldn't shock me if Bitcoin does something, kind of similar, pretty similar there. All right, Scott's saying so many wild predictions on future price out there. Does it have its own VIX? I don't think it has its own VIX. It has its own ETF though. Like, this ticker SBIT goes completely upward when Bitcoin drops. This is 100% inverse tied to Bitcoin. So where IBIT dropping down, SBIT going up, you can kind of think of it that way, Scott. But I don't. You know what? I don't want to talk ahead of talk too fast here. Maybe the VIX does have its own Bitcoin related ticker, but either way, though, this is pro shares ultra short Bitcoin. So this is actually pretty tradable. Moderately priced, good spread, trades a lot of volume per day, at least in terms of shares. So at least right now, watch. Obviously, this will run inverse to Bitcoin, but the more that we keep seeing this knock its head on resistance, knock, 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 tried to open up the door here, but failed, came back down. The more it keeps knocking on that door in a smaller concentration of time, much like we talk about with any one day trade, any one stock. I mean, I know that there's a bunch of people here in our room that aren't Bitcoiners. You don't even look at Bitcoin. You don't care about it. That's fine. That's totally cool. Like, no problem. Listen, everyone's got their own cup of coffee that they order at Starbucks each morning. Mine's not going to be exactly the same as yours. But that's just where I'll tell you, though, the more this keeps knocking its head on this door, much like it would be for any stock that you trade or I trade, well, it should break over this resistance, right? And one more time for me, folks, Scott, Michael, Sam, etc. What are we expecting resistance to flip into? Right? What are we expecting that to flip into? Support. So that's basically how I'd be playing this trade today on this one. All right. So otherwise, though, I do want to talk about a couple stocks that were on our watch list from today. Listen, on a day like today, with everything dropping off as much as it has been, slingshotting back up, back down, I don't want to be trading stocks that have crazy spreads. I'd rather not. This stock at least had a good spread in pre-market. It's a dud now. This is dead in the water now. But from pre-market, this actually had a pretty good move, and it was on our watch list early in the morning. So easy to say it moved up here, but where could you have jumped in from on this trade? Just a quick review on this one, if we can. Where could we jump in on this trade? Well, the answer is on Bookmap. We got to find out by looking at the heat map here and seeing where those iceberg sellers are, or buyers maybe otherwise. And yeah. Give me a quick sec. Wait for this to load. All right, where do we got resistance here on this trade, folks? Sam, Scott, Laureen, Kathleen. Who else we got here joining us here today? See Piyush, you got Ed A, one of our trial members here. You got Barb always joining us. Appreciate her. And Wiz and James M. And got Jason G joining us here today. Great to see Jason. Where do we have resistance here looking at this heat map? Day says 115. Laureen says 115. Rick says 115. I say 115. 115. Where's our next resistance after 115? What do we got after 115? 140, right? Now, let me ask this question. This will go to all of our members inside our live trading room. If you're on YouTube, I really say, hey, you got to be a member inside our live trading room to really learn and understand this. This workshop is kind of like a quick little band-aid that'll kind of patch you up throughout the week. But being in our room each and every day and in our classes each and every month, as far as what to look out for. On a scale of 1 to 10, just do this for me if you can. Just a quick opinionated question here. Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being the hardest, 10 being the easiest. How easy was it to identify those two levels? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the hardest, 10 being the easiest, How would you identify this? Was this, really hard, really easy? Sam's saying 11. The scale's broken there for Sam. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty obvious. Pretty obvious, right? 115 and then like 140, 139. So the first time it came up to resistance here at $1.15, you see a big spike of volume. The first test is the best test. That's where we expect resistance to hold on the first initial poker test of it. So no surprise, pop, drop. Now, if the thing keeps fighting and moving up and trying to nip and test that level, that leaves me to be more confident to say it could break out and run, maybe flip that resistance into a support. We'll see. Obviously, in hindsight, it broke out over this and it moved up well. So on the next test, on the re-break of that big level, it led to a good move shortly after, right? First test, best test, right? Went up to this next resistance at $1.39. That was exactly at 139. Second Price is Right reference here coming up, but the price is indeed right here on this trade because at $1.39, 20,000 share iceberg seller out there. The first time it went into it, it broke over it by a penny. It broke through that sell order, but the first time it tested that level, we saw resistance hold. That's not surprising. What happened here is exactly what happened here. Now, afterwards, though, we did see resistance try and flip into support at first. Like it tried to basically hold, this iceberg plus this peak like together right here as support. But this is where I'll tell you, though, if it's not going to bounce back up, if it's not going to try and push back up here and break over this again and flip this into support, if it's not going to play nice, then the last thing that you want to do is get stuck hoping and holding and, it ends up pulling back lower there for you. So this, was a shortly lived trade, but it was actually pretty clean based on the break out of 115 resistance. Also, what's cool about this here too, I didn't show this until now. Look what popped up here. This is way down there on the bid at 60 cents and 55 cents, 50,000 shares a pop. And shortly after that point is when it started to make the initial push up to 115. I don't think those orders laddered up. They stayed out there for a little longer. Oh no, it looks like one of them did. One of them did. They got pulled here, and one of them did show up right here, though. Now, actually, I think one of our students ended up writing that earlier this morning, if not one of our trial members, Michael W. I think he made a comment on that actually earlier today. I want to give him a quick shout out here. He said Mesa Iceberg on the bid at 116 right here for 50K, right? That was 50,000 shares. Michael, one of our trial members, pointed that out early in pre-market. I wrote to him right away there. I said, good eye. And actually, let me show you this here. Though. I'll give you the full chat. So Michael, one of our trial members inside our trading floor here, said, "Hey, you saw that iceberg order live? That was at 8:42 in the morning." I said, "Good eye. Looks like that buyer showed up about 7 to 8 minutes ago. We need to see it stay over that price, though. The fact it dropped and hasn't moved back up yet is a bit concerning. If that's going to act as true support, then we need to see it bounce. It can't just hold over that forever. The more it keeps, kind of, stabbing that price as support, it's going to eventually break it. And that's what happened here. It broke below it as support. Support flipped into resistance. Tanked. Game over. All right, so just wanted to go over that one because, hey, at least that had a good spread. At least that was moving up in the pre-market hours. It was on our pre-market watch list. But if you want me to get to a crazy one here, there is also one or two crazies before we finish up we can get to. Give me a quick moment here. I'll load up my scanner. Which one was it? Which one? The MKDW or is it the oh, I don't think it's the MKDW now. Yeah, that came back down pretty hard. The JNVR there? Yeah, JNVR. Okay. I mean, look at this spread. So I'm not trading this. There's no need to. If you don't have a need to be trading the stock, then why do it? I mean that. Hey, if you're intending on having a little responsible fun, then just scale back on size, set your stop, and you're not doing anything wrong with that. But if you are a student here that is not making money consistently, or if you're a new student of CTU and you're trying to get your footing, correct, then you need to have something that has a much better spread, much more liquidity on the order book. Now, that aside, I'll still stand by that, for any of our new students joining us here or anyone that's not confident with what they're trading and how they're making money, if they're even making money at all. That's where I'll tell you, you want something with a good spread, good order book. This does not have that. Ignoring that part of it now, what I'll say is this: the more times it presses up against a resistance and tests it in a smaller period, I'd feel good about an entry. $15 as a $5 price point, psychological level to a great degree. You could just see for as long time here, this was stabbing this, it was failing to break higher and hold over it. But at least here at like 1046, if you're watching this still and it is, coming back up to it again, you try and say to yourself, okay, well, this had such a tough time running from this 15 level already. This stock already tested this level numerous times and it failed to really not just run higher from it, but at the bare minimum, flip this into support. If you see this come up to this level, you say, all right, well, if it keeps pressing up against it and if it holds over it cleanly, there is a chance for continuation. That's my mindset when it comes to this type of chart pattern, this elongated resistance test where it's flattening out, exhausting out. Hey, that's easy to say after the fact. It popped. It's not easy to trade this stock when you're working on a 30, 45 cent spread. I mean, shit, that's just untradeable at this point. If it had an 8 cent spread, 7 cent spread, give me that. You know what I mean? I'll take that. I'll feel pretty damn confident with this pattern if the spread is even a fraction bit tighter than what we'll see here off the reopen. This got halted on the way down just a moment ago here, so probably reopen up in about 5 or so minutes. But there just comes to a point of where it becomes not tradable, right? MLGO, there was a point where it was untradeable, but there was a point where it became tradable again. And that was based off the fact that it kept nipping and testing resistance over and over and over. And we're like, wow, really? This is building out really nicely. What if it, re-breaks it? Then there's the chance for the better move. I'm going back like a week and a half ago at this point. Yeah, like look at this. Look at this pattern here. So you had resistance roughly around, we'll say 1450-ish, whatever it is here. I can't go back on Bookmap that far at this point. But the fact that it's holding here, and it's not tanking, if you are watching this pattern build, then it leaves you to ask, all right, well, what if it does re-break that big resistance? It's already had a tough time trying to break over. If it keeps fighting and you're there to try and see like the next re-break, I'll take that trade, but I got to make sure this flips into support. So this actually was a great trade that I was able to capture at least throughout the mid-morning. And I think that was even after, well, not just that run up, but I think even the day before this ran too. Could be wrong on that. Maybe it was the day before that. But I remember a day where I just said, listen, guys, it's not tradable. It's not really a good, stock right now. That's because it wasn't providing any sort of pullback. It wasn't dropping. It wasn't, building consolidation over time. We want consolidation because the more that you keep seeing the top of that consolidation getting poked at, it leaves you to say, all right, there's the chance for the run. So going back to JNVR, this thing is even crazier, in my opinion, compared to the MLGO, not just percentage-wise. MLGO made practically the same type of move. But I think that this is probably even less traded, more thin in terms of the float, the liquidity. It's just to say, though, the more it kept knocking on this door, it broke. The more it kept knocking on the next door, likely around this area here, breakout. So I will say, for any stock to be up 400, 500, 1,000%, eventually it's going to hit a top and crash and never really make this type of up move again. So for me, at least, if there's a stock up 300, 400% around there, it's not that I don't trade that, but that's the point in my head, like 400%, where I start like holding off a little bit. I'm like, let's wait a little bit longer here. Let's see this play out. Let's see more head fakes here. And if it really keeps fighting later in the day at like 3 o'clock or 2:30, maybe there could be one more blast higher. You know what I mean? But otherwise, now at this point, I wouldn't be trying to ride this roller coaster. All right, folks. Hey, I'll tell you what. There's the reopen. Just saw this reopen up. Look at the spread. Look at the orders or lack thereof. You got like peanuts out here. All right, 17 shares, one share. Come on now. All right, folks. I think that we are going to finish up at least for the time being. Last check here on the SPY before we wrap up. Last check on the SPY. Gone nowhere since basically Traders Talk, as I had alluded to, though. This is going to be a key level to watch heading into not just today, but into tomorrow, into this week. The more it keeps getting poked at, it's going to get completely broken through. So with lower highs, it's not looking too pretty here. I'll say that as much. Looks like we're like hanging on by a thread right now. Who knows in the next 4 minutes as we head into the next hourly candle even, we may see this totally blow. It bottomed out as low as 480 from the overnight session. So, I was looking at 490 as potential pre-market support where this could bounce off of. I don't want to move goalposts. 495 area here is a very strong historical level, at least from what we got on the daily chart. So I'd rather wait to see that solidify as support, or otherwise, though, it may just go much lower. So let's see what this afternoon brings, folks. But for Leda, Michael, Barb, Wiz, Kathleen, Alan, Bob, Kerry, all of us here in chat right now, we're going to jump off. We're going to have our next audio broadcast later today at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, afternoon meeting time at least then. So we'll build up a new watch list, scan the market heading into the close. If you're joining us, though, on YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, etc., we appreciate you joining us on our social handles. Continue to join us on our social handles. Hit the follow or subscribe button, the little notification bell icon there, so you're more in the loop with knowing when we go live, when we're not live, and either way, we look forward to having you join us inside our live trading room. You can go right down. The only thing I effed up on today. I forgot to switch that one banner this whole time. All good. Folks, hey, if you wanted to join us inside our live trading room, go right down to the link on the banner below if you're on YouTube, Facebook Live, etc. That being ctu.co/trial. We'll be back at 2:30 p.m. Eastern later on this afternoon, and we'll go from there. I'll talk to you all soon.